All right. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Heromakers podcast. Thanks, guys, for joining us again. We are like closing in on 30 episodes, and like this is a thing.
Woo.
Okay. Did you remember one of our guests told us that if we hit 25 podcasts, then we're doing better than 95% of people who have started a podcast because they don't hit 25. So we're good. We're in like the 95th percentile, right? It's great. And Anne, can I just say, like this morning, I am just having like this spirit of gratitude. I don't know what's up with me, but I was, as maybe some of you guys don't know this, but right. So the Heromakers doesn't really make money. So Anne and I have to have our other jobs. And so I work for this little organization for one of my jobs called Media Associates International, heading up their communications. And today we had a socially distanced like little lunch thing, the four of us.
Oh.
And one of the people there brought in this pumpkin dessert. Oh, it was amazing. I was like, I'm going to have this guy every day. I'm like, you've got to come over and give me this food every single day. So I'm grateful for pumpkin pie, pumpkin desserts. But, so, okay, hang on. Anne, you're freezing. Hang on, Jim. We're going to wait for Anne to come back here. Okay. Yeah. There you go. You're frozen. Okay, you're good? You're good, Anne? Is your audio good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, so Anne, so I'm just having the spirit of gratitude. And can I just say, like, I'm very excited about our guest today, Jim McDonough, Colonel Jim McDonough. And Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Lori and Ann. I'm glad to be here. It's really nice to talk to you.
Jim, can I just tell you a quick story? So sure. When in my former life, I got my undergrad in journalism communication. And so I spent a couple years working in a newspaper, and I was like fresh out of college. And so they put me on like what I would call hard news, right? So like they sent me out one time to cover like this car accident, and I was so bad at it. So they put me on the features section, like human interest stories. So they would send me around town and I would be like interviewing people. And my favorite people, Jim, were veterans.
Oh,
like,
really?
Yes. I loved hearing stories of veterans. One, the people who would share, sometimes they wouldn't talk a lot about their experiences, but just generally about their life. And then second, because I found veterans to be some of the most humble people. I think there's this like spirit of humility. So Jim, we have these 9 hero traits that we talk about throughout the podcast. And like, I think with veterans that we, like people will typically think of some of our hero traits, which are courage, sacrifice, but humility, I think is also one. So I'm excited to talk to you just because I think there's that aspect that's going to be woven in. But let me introduce you first. Colonel Jim McDonough is, so you have 26 years of serving in our military in different capacities, which you're going to tell us all about. Mm-hmm. And then, and you were the director of Veterans Affairs for the state of New York. Mm-hmm. And now you are heading up this great organization called Headstrong, where you provide free mental health services for veterans and their families. Is that correct? Did I say that all correctly?
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Okay. Headstrong is a national, it's a group practice spread out across the country that delivers mental health treatment and services to our nation's military connected families. So you got it right.
Good. Okay. And so Jim, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your childhood, where you grew up, and then kind of how you got into serving in the military as well.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the fact I'm an upstate New Yorker. So I grew up in the shadows of a large Air Force base. I went to a Catholic school. Most of my classmates were children of military families that served in the United States Air Force during Vietnam. I go back a ways. So graduated from high school in 77. And so you can imagine with Vietnam ending in 75, many of the kids I hung out with, primarily their dads, but some of their moms were serving in the active Air Force. And some of them had been prisoners of war in Vietnam and were still flying aircraft for the United States Air Force. So I like to say I grew up in the shadows of military families, and I was always intrigued by their life. A lot of time spent on that military base, hanging out with my pals from high school. And I really, the lifestyle, the quality of life, and what I saw most importantly in the quality of the people is something that I was drawn to. So I graduated from high school, put myself through college. And as soon as I graduated from college, believe it or not, I enlisted in the United States Army. So 4-year degree, showed up at basic training, and there was an option to go to officer candidate school right out of basic training, which I did. So, zipped through basic training, went into officer candidate school and was commissioned, and spent a lifetime of service, it seems like, for those 26 years in a lot of different capacities, from command positions, leading soldiers, taking care of their families, staff positions in the Pentagon and beyond. I was a speechwriter to the Secretary of the Army, tours overseas, 2 in Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom and the precursor to that. And then, Korea, did a year in Korea, but throughout it all, served all over the world, a lot of duty assignments in the United States, but it was a life I loved. And it was over in an instant. I don't even know how it ended so quickly. I never really thought about it ever ending until, my mom got sick. My brother, by the way, is a retired Army colonel as well. So parents were divorced. The 2 of us agreed to take care of my mom and her failing health. We kind of split assignments in and out of New York. My final assignment was at West Point. And so I retired and came home to New York. So just a really cool set of life experiences that I accumulated in the Army, and I loved every minute of it.
So, okay, so you said in there that like when you were growing up and you were kind of surrounded by some people, that you were drawn to the qualities of them. Like what were those qualities? What was so attractive to you?
The first thing I saw was discipline throughout their life. The way they approached people with respect, with dignity, and compassion. And then this ability to take care of one another, to me in service, it's unmatched in the outside world. You actually have a responsibility to care for people in these various leadership positions, and it's unmatched in the real world. I'd like to think that what I learned there makes me a better leader in this outside world, but I first and foremost saw the discipline of a military officer, and I respected it. And then you touched upon it as you were opening this up, humility, right? These are people who, my God, some of these people were prisoners of war, lived an everyday life coming out of Vietnam as if their lives were normal, and they were far from it. And I didn't get to peek behind the lid on too many problems and too many families, but I knew there was struggle. But I knew that these were people with a great deal of humility that approached life. And the third thing I'll say is this idea that they existed to serve others. And I really, really dug that. This idea that it's not about you, it's about everyone around you. And the words associated with that are selfless servant, that type of selfless service to one's country. As a little kid, I'm one of these kids who played Army in the woods. We dug forts. We played, I don't know what it was. My dad was a Marine. He had a bag full of stuff that he came home with from Korea. He had a slideshow that was from Korea. I don't know. It was kind of like a love affair with the whole thing. And I liked playing it, and then I got a chance to do it in real life. But the people I noticed along the way were the greatest Americans that you'll ever see. They were just salt of the earth, humble servants who believed in their fellow mankind and believed in the value of serving their country. And I was hooked. So.
Oh man, what great discipline, humility, selfless servant. I was watching an interview that you did, and you mentioned that phrase. And so I'm wondering, Jim, like, do you think that kind of living with like kind of that selfless, humble spirit, is that something that people learn, or is that something that a lot of the people went into the service already having?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think for those of us who had it going in, I think we had an advantage, right? We were all in from the very beginning. For those whose lives didn't include it necessarily in the early stages of their lives, the service instills it. I mean, it is something we teach, that your role as a leader is that you exist for others, to include, laying down your own life if necessary for others. So it's the ultimate expression of selflessness, and we teach it. And I got to tell you, once learned, it's never lost. And I think that's really the value of military service, both in and out. It's something that never leaves you. You treat others the same way that you did in service. And that begins with just this unending amount of respect for people, compassion for who they are, and empathy. And, I think as many of us learn it as many of us showed up with it. But I also think this: no matter if you showed up with it or not, the service in the military is going to make you better at it. Now, I'll say this about that. I did realize late in my career that it comes at a price. And not everyone is willing to kind of accept the price of selfless service. It puts a great deal of strain on your families. And you tend to, and I learned this, and I've actually had this conversation with my youngest son, who is a brand new second lieutenant in the 101st Airborne. I just said, look out for it, because, if you don't balance what your family needs with what those around you require of you, the service actually rewards your ability to serve others so brilliantly. The system rewards that. And so the better you are at it, the more the system is going to ask of you. And it took me a long time to recognize that, and it came at expense to my family. And so while I love it, I recognize that it's not for everybody, but for those that it is a calling for, it is a very remarkable life, and a rewarding and fulfilling life. But it can have its downside.
Yeah, as you were talking, a couple of thoughts were running through my head. Like, I think that what you guys do as far as like really caring for each other and teamwork and like thinking as a unit is reality. Whereas in many other people's lives, it's a theory or it's an inspiration. It's like, oh, that would be really great. But you guys are like doing it. And I think that's like completely unique, I think, to people who serve in the military. So well done, because that takes a lot of sacrifice, like you said. And then as you're talking, I kept thinking the word like loyalty comes to mind as well. Loyalty to country, loyalty to your team, loyalty to the army and the military. But then I wonder if there's a competition of loyalty between like what you're called to do and then your family and your marriage. You know what I mean? So it's like, wonder if you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Ann. There's a reason West Point is duty, honor, country, and beyond that is your family. It sounds harsh to say, but here's the thing: if you're doing the business of our nation's armed forces, you actually want that. You want the ability for an organization to look at itself through the lens that in its leaders, it requires you to be that. And as I say, I recognize it's not for everyone, but for those it is. When you're around soldiers and when you're around their families, even when they're doing stupid things, your heart just lights up with this responsibility and love for them. I don't know how to describe it for you, except it's so deeply within you that you feel good, even in the darkest of days, when you're recognizing the responsibility you have towards others. There is strife there, and duty, honor, country, then family. It's a hard life for many to kind of balance. I'll be frank. I mean, others were better at it than I was, and it took me a long time to figure it out, because I just committed myself 1,000% to serving my fellow soldiers and their families. It was as if they looked at me as someone who was forever going to take care of them. And my job was to never let them down. So there's a lot of pressure on leaders. And it's very isolating as a leader to kind of go through life that way. But it's an honor. And for those that do it, it's an honor. So,
Jim, I'm wondering, with all the different experiences that you've had, like if there's one that stands out as most memorable or most life-changing for you.
I have to say, time as a battery commander, which is I was in command of 120 soldiers for almost 3 years. I was very lucky. I ended up getting an entire tour in Germany, almost as a battery commander. And I had 120 soldiers. And when you do that over that length of time, gosh, I can tell you the names of some of those soldiers, you know, Specialist Zulke, Corporal Legg. You know, I can just tell you some of the people that, good God, Specialist Good, Lieutenant Shaw, First Sergeant Sanford. I mean, I can go all the way back to 1986, 1989. And I think because I had such a long run of time spent with soldiers at that level, and you're in command of 120 soldiers in Europe. Some of them had their families, some didn't. You're in a foreign country, like all you have is one another. As wonderful as it was to live in Germany, I really do go back, and I think my time spent as a battery commander was probably what set me up for success in life later. You know, that wonderful 3-year period was so grounding on how to take care of people and how to love one another. I think it was in that assignment that I learned everything I needed to learn on how to command, how to take care of soldiers, how to love their families, how to do the right thing. You know, it's just, yeah, for me, it was that. There are a ton of memories. You know, I will say, like, service in the Pentagon as speechwriter to the Secretary of the Army, you know, the highest civilian official in the United States Army. That was memorable. That was a lot of hard work as a young promotable captain major. I traveled all over the world with the Secretary of the Army. And for me, going from soldier level to the highest levels of the Army, and that gap in between and closing it by virtue of those two experiences, understanding strategic leadership, the thoughts of our Army senior leaders, supporting them, and then down at the bare bones, you know, troop level of the United States Army, what it meant to, you know, pull 20-hour days for, you know, weeks on end. It's unparalleled. It really is. So, but I think that time spent as a young battery commander, probably the happiest, most enjoyable aspect of my military service was in command at that level.
You know, Jim, I heard this phrase once, and I don't remember the exact word, but the idea was that, like, if you strip away all things, but you have people, you have everything.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing like that, and part of what you're saying is like that community, like that group of men were like their memory is still with you. Are you still friends with some of them as well? Do you stay in touch with them?
Oh yeah, it's so weird. Yeah, and I'll say men and women. You know, I was fortunate enough. My first unit of assignment, I think we must have had 2 women out of 180, which made for interesting dynamics. But what it did so early in my career was kind of just the necessity of being a leader to all, no matter what walk of life they came from, where they came from, how they soldiered. I certainly watched the Army integrate women at every aspect of my, you know, my trajectory. And so for me, yeah, I still keep in touch with them. You know, it's so weird. Specialist Jones, this is a kid I'll always remember. He's been writing to me annually about his life, and you know, he says goofy things on how much I meant to him and things like that. And you know, here he's in his 50s probably at this point with family, and he was a young radio operator for me, and I love the kid. There's just something. He was goofy. He was just a young, goofy soldier, and I still keep in touch with him. I have an affinity for the people I served with. They were, it's not hard to say this, they were loves of your life when you were in those positions. And that I think was the greatest gift. Like you just met incredible people from all walks of life, and you're responsible for them for 3 years. Like it's not even heady. It's out of this world to think that you can be like a young man from upstate New York, you know, sent to Germany, and this is the responsibility you have. It's heartwarming for people like me to remember those days. Yeah.
Oh man, thank you so much for even just doing the special shout outs to all of
Uh,
your
yeah,
friends. Like it's obvious.
these are, God, I could name names, and if they ever saw this, they'd be like, yeah, here he is again. He's being as goofy as he ever was. So, yeah.
You should totally send it to them. Merry Christmas. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I know.
but I love it. And I really think that, and another hero trait to load onto you, no pressure, is like just empathy. And the definition on the website is that you truly enter into the lives of others. So you understand where they come from, you're understanding thoroughly, or you're trying so hard to care for them as they're under you and in your, there's huge responsibility. These are real people. And then I can just imagine that just continues even to where you're at today.
Yeah, I've carried everything forward. And one of the most important character traits of a leader, I think, is empathy. The ability to relate to all those around you. And on multiple times during the day, place yourself in their shoes to understand where they're coming from. To me, it's one of the secret ingredients to leadership. When you behave that way, when you demonstrate empathy, people have a tendency of doing their best because they know you're in it for them. And certainly everything I learned in military service, I carry over to my leadership responsibilities outside of military service. We had a board meeting last night for Headstrong, and I closed by talking about the end of the year and just what a wonderful team of professionals and how much love I have for them. You don't develop that without understanding everything about them, and I think it's not enough people have it. It's one thing to be a supervisor. It's another thing to be a leader. And I think for those of us who've been fortunate to serve in the armed forces, we understand the difference between supervision and leadership. And fortunately for organizations outside, when they attract people like me into further service, we bring to that an incredible set of characteristics that first and foremost are grounded in taking care of the people we're responsible for. When I was state director of veteran services in New York, I had an enterprise of people all across the state of New York. And, I made it a point to get out there, right? And to really see what it's like. And it's respected when leaders put themselves in the position of others always, it tends to start with a great deal of respect, both back and forth across both sides of this. So.
What's goofy, Jim, is that when we're emailing, your email, you sign it respectfully. Like that's your signature. And that was the first email I ever remember getting that actually has respectfully as their signature line. And like that word is actually pretty powerful too. What does it mean?
Funny. If you lead with it, everything is easier. Yeah. I don't know how to say it, but when you, especially in this environment that the world is in right now, and I think we all could admit there's a lack of respect, buzzing around the globe in very fast order. And I find that when you lead with it, it just has this tendency to make whatever it is you're doing easier. You don't bite, you don't get lost in things that don't matter. And it always allows me to operate from a higher ground and never come, it's one thing to come off it when you're dealing with difficult problems, but it's something I find is necessary to keep at all times. It just makes my life easier. Yeah. And I think for those around me, it makes their lives easier.
Yeah, I think it's great.
The best. Yeah. When you offer respect first.
Yeah.
So Jim, let's hop over to Headstrong, and let's talk about it. So your tagline, is this your tagline, no mind left behind? Would you call that your tagline?
No, that was the tagline for our first ever fundraising campaign. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But our tagline, and I really want you to remember this one, healing the hidden wounds of war. I mean, that is the tagline of this organization, wherever I am with my Headstrong swag on.
We see it. We see your branding.
Okay, good. So, it's this is an organization that goes back to 2012 when a young Marine came home and realized that in coming home, he was witnessing the death of his fellow Marines by suicide at a number that exceeded those lost in combat that he was responsible. So his name was Zach Iskel. His name is Zach Iskel. I met him in 2012. He had a lot of good relationships in New York City, and some of them were in the medical community, primarily in this case, Weill Cornell Medicine, a large New York, based healthcare practice. Zach had some friends in there, and together they put together this project Headstrong, and they developed this tagline, Healing the Hidden Wounds of War. And the whole idea was to, and remember in 2012 and earlier, there were problems within the Department of Veterans Affairs around access and timeliness to care. So there were all kinds of contextual problems that served as a backdrop to building this nonprofit, many of which have since been improved upon. But back in the day, people were having a hard time accessing mental health treatment. I will say that not much has changed in America today, and I'll talk about that too. But the idea is they were going to put together a nonprofit, an organization that had the best evidence-based, trauma-informed clinicians they could find across the country to deliver mental health treatment at no expense, with no barriers and no stigma to the individual seeking care. And they opened the spigot. It was people like me, post 9/11 veterans, our family members, got into serving active duty service members. And so the Headstrong model embraces those three populations, active duty service members, veterans, and their family members. And the idea was to kind of keep it as free as possible to any barrier you could dream up. And out of that, which started in New York City, 8 years in, we're now in 28 program communities across 12 states, including the District of Columbia. And we're putting the finishing touches on a 5-year plan that make it even bigger and bolder than that. And so what we pride ourselves on is finding the best trauma-informed clinicians we can across the country who are willing to open up their pre-existing practices. We don't build buildings. We deliver money directly to clinicians who directly care for individuals. And I'll talk about the impact of COVID and things like that. But in a flash of brilliance in 2012, it really was a very lean model. If you could raise money and pass it directly to clinicians and do all the backroom things that good nonprofits have to do, to run a good organization, then you were onto something. And it turned out to be true. Today, we serve about 1,000 clients a month, across those 28 markets. And I will tell you, the core of our population are people with really chronic, complex, co-occurring conditions. And I think when you think about Headstrong, one of the things I'd like your viewers to remember is that we put no time boundaries on care. So if you're, familiar with some of the things in mental health treatment in America today, a lot of it is insurance-based. You'll get 8 visits, and then, what are you, cured or not cured? So Headstrong recognized the deficiency in that model, which permeates our society, and left it open-ended. We have long-standing clients, some who've been with us for years. Why? Because they need to remain in treatment. And for those who can exit with their clinician, the door is always open. And we have some who come back. Life disrupts whatever and brings them back. So I'm going to take a break.
Yeah. So, Jim, it's interesting because I have some childhood trauma that even decades later, it'll just kind of raise its head every once in a while. So I like your model a lot, because there's also that, okay, so people maybe get to the point where they feel like they could cope, they're stable, but you never know, when they're just going to need somebody again, right?
Yeah. Well, as you know, triggers erupt.
Yeah.
Things happen in life which dig up our past. And truthfully, Lorraine, many of our clients suffer from the same. There's some degree of childhood trauma in their life. Some of our clients have experienced military sexual trauma. These are, and then layer in time in service, right? And then layer in, family difficulty or whatever, substance abuse. I'm very proud of the fact that we take on more risk than the average mental health professionals are willing to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is real stuff. When people approach you with expressions of suicidal ideation, you know, and you're in the thick of, you know, what are you doing about it? This takes the best people in the business to kind of unpack that, use evidence-based approaches, you know, in generating outcomes that work for people. But the secret sauce here is the sacred relationship between an individual and their clinician. And it can exist for life as far as I'm concerned. You know, it puts pressure on people like me to raise money. Fortunately for us, we have great funders. You know, this month alone, you know, I'll just mention one, Harry's, the razor, you know, maker. They've been with us for years, and they did a wonderful job this fall in our fall fundraising campaign, just putting more gas in our tank. And an endless number of donors and funders who believe that in particular, the invisible pandemic within this pandemic is the difficulty people are having with their mental health. And, you know, in many ways, it's a twofold set of problems right now or more. And so fortunately for us, with good funders, they keep putting fuel in the tank. It allows us to expand, allows us to deliver continuous care. One of the things we did very well was back in March, you know, we were, like everyone else, we were treating people face to face. When COVID hit, we immediately pivoted to a telemental health platform that we always had. And it's become the treatment method du jour that keeps continuous care flowing. And, you know, we've got story after story and evidence amounting that it works. You know, it has its ups and downs. You know, you can be on a phone with someone in a drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts and their kids are screaming in the back seat, and, you know, a therapist is trying to deal with what's going on in their life. So, or a child runs across in the background. You know, it's not as private as one may think at all times. So, but the good news is we were able to deliver continuous care and treatment.
I just want to say thank you for what you're doing, because obviously I think you're saving lives. You are like, yeah, just so much care has to go into that. And so that's a huge system of care that you're setting up. And so I'm really grateful. I wanted to know, like, what are the obstacles that you face in communicating the importance of your work?
You know, the first thing, and this is something about us as individual veterans, part of what we embrace in military service is our resilience to everything around us, right? You, especially as leaders, I think that, so there's a great deal of stigma, and the first thing that we're confronted with as the primary challenge in this business is getting people to open up and express their vulnerability to what's going on in their life. And so the idea that you have to make people comfortable to talk about what's going on in their life, it's the biggest barrier of all with people like us. There's a, you know, humility, pride, and resilience, they're all packaged together, none of which supports a great deal of vulnerability, especially as you rise in the leadership ranks of the armed forces. You're expected to be that tough, you know, no matter what, we're going to succeed, we're going to drive all the way, and I'm going to take care of you to the best of my ability. That in itself is isolating as a leader. And you know, we tend to think of the corporal, the sergeant, the staff sergeant, the airman, you know, the young Marine, soldier, sailor, you know, airman, you know, these, while that's true, leaders bear an unbelievable amount of increased responsibility, which leads to this lack of vulnerability in themselves. And when they do come forward and set an example for others, we like that because they're willing to show others that, hey man, I have problems, we have problems. If you have problems, this is okay. So I think, Ian, the largest challenge is getting people to just understand being vulnerable is not a sign of weakness. And that is the first step in treatment is just getting people willing to come forward and admit that they're having difficulty in their lives. And this is what I like about Headstrong. It's, you know, people like me, we served, we get it. And so the approach that you can take, and many of our clinicians have a long, you know, storied resume of supporting veterans. And so they're competent in what it means to be a veteran. And so therefore they understand what it means to be a veteran, and they can go one-on-one with one in a way that breaks down that, that stigma, and that allows them to express vulnerability, and then get them into a highly individualized approach to treatment. And that's the other thing about Headstrong is, it's one person at a time, wherever they are. It's that moment. You create the engagement, you bring them into care, you get them to express their vulnerability, and then you start rebuilding whatever it is that they're having difficulty with. So,
it's interesting, Jim, because I was listening to a podcast maybe a month ago or so, and they were talking about this form of trauma therapy where it's like 10 or 12 weeks long, and it's like really intensive, and there's all these like worksheets, and I thought, well, in some ways, like, that's great. Like, let's quickly get through the trauma so we could just move on with life, right? I don't know if it's effective. I mean, some people say I think that form of therapy is or not. But what strikes me too is that, and I was talking to Anne about this like several days ago offline, is just that, like, I think when we say things out loud, so like say when we have all this stuff where internally we're kind of, it's going around in our head, and then when we verbalize it and we start talking, it loses its power. Like, there's something that actually, like, when we say things out loud and we start talking, we're like, oh, like, it's not quite. Have you found that to be like part of the healing? It's just like the ability to let things out.
Yeah, I think what you're hitting on is the difference between projecting and being honest with oneself. And there's a difference between it. Many people in the armed forces project, resilience, project, a great deal of security and confidence. But the difference between the two is being truthful with yourself and expressing that versus, so, when you can find within yourself the ability to talk truth about yourself, you're no longer projecting. And I think that's what you're hitting on, is that the art of this is to get to that truth, an honest assessment of oneself, and allow yourself to speak that truth versus what you're expected to project, as a veteran of the armed forces. And that's tough work, right? Because you're taught to be everything all the time to all people. You represent them, you're responsible for them. But when you peel that back and you really look deep inside yourself and you're having difficulty, you're finally going to get the ability to speak truth within yourself. And then I think from there, everything unfolds.
I don't know if you're actually a spiritual person, but I actually had somebody who was really formative in how I understood myself. And so he said that I think what we're talking about really is the importance of community as well, and that we need each other, because he said if you cry tears on your own, you are more broken and than before, but that if you actually cry tears and also speak truth to somebody else, they're actually tears of healing. And that actually is a spiritual thing that happens even between people.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ian. I think my sense of community is defined by the people I work with, the people I love, the people I served with. And I think within that orbit, when you have the relationships that are open and honest and allow that dialogue and set of experiences to unfold, you're in an environment unlike any other, where people speak truth and are comfortable with it. And I think it's very rare, because I do think most of life is spent projecting the image of, the persona of, the experiences of a military officer, right? But I guess I've gotten a little more wise as I've aged, and that I understand the value of being honest with myself and speaking honestly to others. But it's taken me a while to get there. I will be honest, I hit a lot of the stuff that I dealt with throughout the years very well. And it's been later in life that I've realized the value of just talking honestly. But it hasn't been easy because of what's expected of people like me when we're serving.
I totally have empathy for you because I think that that's a lot of pressure. I mean, it's like, I can't even imagine the pressure. Yeah. So, I mean, kudos, honestly. And I'm
It's a
just,
conversation I have with my youngest son, who's a
okay.
brand new second lieutenant, not to lose sight of this side of military service, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I did want to ask, because you said that, I mean, you just mentioned that it was really difficult for you to like come to grips with like, so what helped you and what was that turning point for you?
Uh, Finally being willing to be honest about what was going on in my life. I got to a point where I realized it was doing harm to me, not being as forthcoming as I am today. And so I'll tell you very honestly what it took. It took failure. It took personal failure in my life for me to come to terms with how you get beyond it, and on the other side of failure. That's what it was about, Ian. It was about never having failed before in my life, and having failed. And what do you do in that failure? You can read books, you can talk to people, you can go into therapy, you can do everything under the sun, but until you recognize a responsibility to own up to that failure and do something about it, you fall short. So, I never thought I was going to be a failure at anything in my life. And when you are, it's the most grounding, humbling experience of all, to recognize that you need to do something about that and continue serving others. So it took failure, Ann. It's what it took. So,
Jim, my dad would always say, he always says that, show me somebody who's never failed and I'll show you somebody who's never done anything. Like that's one of his favorite phrases.
yeah.
And I think, yeah, like failure is where you learn the most too, right?
Yeah, it's a struggle to fail.
Yeah.
If you're, especially if you're not used to it, right?
Yeah.
If you find yourself failing, it is perhaps the greatest human struggle of all. And getting beyond it is struggle on top of the struggle. So, what I realized is I needed help in others. This community sense, Ian, that you bring up is, I'll tell you, there's a couple of non-commissioned officers I've served with. They check in with me. How you doing, man? And we go to lunch. They're still in the area where I live right now. I saw one a year ago, guy who worked for me. He suddenly passed away in the last 3 months. Young man, unexpectedly. And, a group of us just got together, and every one of us has had some form of failure. That was the other thing, is like, I didn't realize everyone else had something going on in their life that was as difficult as what I was dealing with. I just wasn't seeing it. But I've come to learn that no matter who we are, there's something in each of us that we're struggling with. And it took me forever to be willing to come forward in that failure and embrace my friends and let them know that I too had arrived. So, but fortunately for me, they've been godsends. Building healthier relationships out of it is something I committed myself to. So, yeah.
It's kind of the common denominator for humanity. Like we're all broken, we're all hurting, we are all feeling like a failure, and we're not talking about it.
Fortunately for me, Lori, I never felt that way before I failed. Because I put up I put up boundaries. I was very good at compartmentalizing my life. It was, and you get so good at it that you're missing everything outside the boundaries. And right outside the boundaries are people's failures, and you're just not tracking that. And then when you end up in that situation, the only way forward is to kind of break it all down, open yourself up, and participate in life more generally than the pieces that, I was living life in pieces is not life. There's more to it. So it took me a long time, and only through failure did I come to respect that. So.
Yeah. Well, and I can imagine like you wouldn't even be in the position that you're in right now unless you recognize the failures and you're willing to work through them and admit them and be honest, right?
The good news is it's the people we're serving. They're going through the same damn things, right? They're tragedy, failure, loss, grief, emotions like it. So to a certain extent, I've joined the crew that we serve,
Yeah.
right? So there's,
Yeah.
use the word empathy.
Yeah.
It is the definition of empathy. When you're one of them, you're not one of them. I'm one of us. So it's been eye-opening for me in the leadership position I'm in, to kind of be part of this team, and be part of the tribe forever. So
Yeah.
Also
So
makes you more relatable.
yeah.
makes you more relatable.
Yeah.
And
I think makes you more human.
And yeah, Jim, it's interesting because I'm actually editing a book on leadership right now, and it's telling the stories of people around the world, global leaders, and they're talking about like the one key characteristic that they've learned from strong leaders is the ability to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. I mean, across the board, like that's what changes people. That's what helps people to become good leaders. Really interesting stuff. So Jim, before we wrap up, so what does 2021 look like for you and for Headstrong?
It's going to be a cool year. So the next year, it's year one of a 5-year effort to expand our reach and our stance across this country. So I call it the year of setting conditions. What you're doing is finding the right people, putting the right plans in place, building capacity to be capable of being bigger and capable of more service. So it's a very grounding year for Headstrong in the year ahead. Not necessarily a year of expansion yet, but within those 28 markets that we're operating in already, going deep within them to look at how well we're doing what we're doing. We've got 5 communities beginning with Seattle, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, and Atlanta that are priority communities for Headstrong in 2021. We're going to go into them. Some of them are openers. Seattle will open at the end of January, but we're going to return to some of them to kind of go back in each of them and look at how we're doing to create relationships with more clients, drive growth, put more clients into care, engage better with our community, engage with our partners, and really put together the inputs that will put more people into care in these 5 markets. It's something of a pressure test, because what we learn from that this year will then be expanded upon in the other Headstrong communities that we're already in. So the lessons learned, what I want to do is I want to normalize Headstrong performance at various intervals across all our markets, 12, 24, 36, 48 months. What does it mean to be a Headstrong community? How many clinicians? How many clients? What's the ratio? What are the outcomes we're achieving? So really looking hard inwardly to improve upon the quality of treatment that we're delivering, open up greater access to care, and above all else, keep the trust and confidence of those we're serving and those that support us. And we call that value. Headstrong's dimensions are quality, access, and value. And so 2021 is a year where we're paying attention to details and getting it better, getting it right. Because then the next 4 years, taking us to 2025, are going to be about expanding upon that in additional communities across the country. I will say this, our Headstrong 2025 strategic vision is called, creating a mental health practice of choice for America's military connected families. Now that's a mouthful, but it means working alongside our government in a complementary way to deliver care in the community that works for a subset of our veterans, their family members, and service members that may not want to be served in the Department of Veterans Affairs. So it's about expansion in broad terms, but 2021 is look hard, look within, get it right, then multiply it. So
well, I think that's a great focus, because it's like, you're aiming for excellence before you grow, right? Like you don't want to grow in a way that's it's an unhealthy structure, which probably it's not anyways right now, but
no, but everybody can be better.
That's right. Yeah.
We always can be better at what we do. So you said it best, Lori. It is that relentless pursuit of excellence before you try to get too far out over your skis.
Yeah.
And so, that's what the year ahead is like for Headstrong. So it's an opportunity to excel. And we got a wonderful team. God, they're some of the best people I've ever worked with. They're passionate, they're smart, they're committed, and they're just full of love for what the mission is.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like you said at the beginning, the difference between a supervisor and a leader. Like that's, but Jim, thank you. I mean, there's so many good takeaways for me, and there's so many good takeaways for me, and I hope for other people, because a lot of our hero traits were touched upon, even if we didn't talk about them directly. I mean, there's integrity that I heard in there. There's impartiality, which is the ability to kind of see beyond, the things that are on the surface, and to say, okay, everybody has like these skills, these whatever gifts inside of them. Let's get them out there. You're honoring people, empathy, all the good. And I hope people hear that in our conversation, that like all of these things can be embodied, but it takes intentionality. It takes us willing to say, well, where maybe are we failing that we can address, and what can we learn from that, right? I'm also hoping that like 2021 is a year of just like self-introspection, and all of us learning, like the name of your organization, Headstrong. Not, a lot of times we tend to be like physically strong, but emotionally, mentally, socially, psychologically strong as well. So thank you, Jim, for being on the podcast. It's an honor. Thanks again for your service to our country. Just amazing.
Yeah, it was fun, Lori and Ann. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I wish you the best in 2021, and let's stay friends. Okay.
We will stay friends for sure. Yeah. And thanks you guys listening for another episode of the Heromakers podcast. If you guys loved it, then please share it with other people. And I think it's worth listening to again and again. So go ahead and do that. And we'll see you guys next time.